Utah Politics.
Time now to dig into some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have former Congressman Ben McAdams and State Senator Dan McKay. Gentlemen, great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Great to be with you, Glenn.
Good to be with you.
Let's start off with SCOTUS, the nominee of Judge Brown Jackson, making its way through the Senate. Utah senators split on the confirmation. Ben, let's start with you. What should we make of this?
You know, it's really disappointing to see. We've kind of devolved to a point where the Senate, you're going to vote against a nominee if they come from the president of another party. And so I think we need to give kudos to Senator Romney for being willing to look at the justice on her merits, on her qualifications, and then vote for her on that. He said even in his confirmation statement that he knows he's not going to agree with every ruling that she makes, but she's clearly a qualified individual to sit on the Supreme Court. So my respect goes to Senator Romney for really looking past the politics of it and judging her on the merits of her abilities to serve on the Supreme Court.
Senator, what are you making of this? We have seen Senator Lee in the past vote to confirm this very judge at the federal level, but not at the SCOTUS level.
Yeah, you know, it was really interesting. I thought Senator Lee laid out a pretty good point, which is the Supreme Court is really becoming about whether or not there's an ideological mix or whether or not it matters how much, you know, one party controls or another. And it's really sad to see that becoming the proxy fight for politics in a lot of ways. You know, I look at the current nominee and I say, you know, she seems on paper very qualified, but when you listen to Senator Lee talk about the obfuscated answers that she's given about her judicial ideology or philosophy, I can understand his concern, and I fully support Senator Lee, but I'm sure that surprises Ben.
Ben, go ahead and talk on that point, because that's one of the things Senator Lee did make a point of, is she wasn't answering my questions.
Yeah, I think it's disappointing to see this confirmation process and how it really has gone into the gutter. And I think Democrats are guilty of this too, but a confirmation process should be about the qualifications of the nominee and what they bring to the Supreme Court. And really it's devolved into this gotcha scenario that you try and ask trick questions that can trip them up. And you know, I don't know that anybody believes for a second that Senator Lee was contemplating a yes vote and switched to no. I think it was an exercise in political theater, and that's what Mike Lee does, is he votes no.
Talk about the potential of the election year playing a role in this. Senator McKay, does that have anything to do with it?
I actually don't think Senator Lee looks at this as an election year question. To me, I think he looks at the Supreme Court with a different level of scrutiny as he's trying to figure out, you know, how best to be the final arbiter. And that's the hard part about the Supreme Court that is different than our federal appellate courts or any of our federal district courts, is the Supreme Court really is the final answer. And so you really want great transparency from, you know, from any of the nominees about their bias and or their biases, right? We acknowledge that they all have biases, every single one of them. And what you're really trying to do is get as much transparency from, and so you can expose those biases as you can. And in some ways, I'd argue, I think Senator Lee makes a great point. If you don't expose those biases or you don't get those answers answered, then I think you're in safe ground to vote no.
Ben, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but let's dig into it more. The partisan nature of what this nomination process has become. It wasn't that long ago where Supreme Court nominees were flying through the Senate with maybe 2 or 3 no votes, and that certainly has changed. We're all about the same age, and it's changed in our lifetime, no doubt about that. What do you make of that?
This is not heading anywhere good. You know, I saw up close and personal when I was in Congress how broken Washington, D.C. is. And I'll tell you, I think it goes for Democrats and Republicans. At some point, somebody has to say that the country matters more than their political party, that they're willing to put the good of the country ahead of party politics and step back from it. And I think that's what Senator Romney did with his vote to support the confirmation of the justice, was to say, I'm looking at her qualifications, not her party affiliation or which president she was nominated by. At some point, both parties, if they keep up in this ante, it's not heading anywhere good, and it's not making our country stronger. We need to have people in Washington who can do what's good for the country ahead of what's good for the party and step it down. Both parties need to stop this up in the ante, and they need to start stepping it down and doing what's right for the country.
Yeah,
everyone wants to talk about stopping, you know, controlling the crazy, but let's be honest. Having a democratic republic like we have has historically always been a mess. And just because our generation is starting to see it for the first time doesn't escape the fact that, you know, Justice Clarence Thomas, his confirmation was a mess. Robert Bork, Harriet Miers, Merrick Garland, you get on the list. The Supreme Court has always been a mess. Now, here's the one thing I will tell you is that we really ought to be looking at justices for the most important component, which is the American people have a contract with each other and with the land that we live in, and that contract is the Constitution. And as much as we want to see things hidden between the pages of that Constitution to come up with a rationale for doing X, Y, or Z, we've got to stick to that contract, because anytime you get outside the plain language of that contract, America struggles. And that's why this fight is where it's at, is that we have seen justices over the last 25 years start to get very creative between the text of the Constitution.
Is there an issue, though, if we get to the point, and you could argue we already have, where the presidency and the Senate need to be controlled by the same party just to get a nominee through? Ben?
Yeah, that is not what the Constitution intended, and that is not good for the country. The more we politicize the courts need to be the neutral arbiter. They are above politics, and they interpret the Constitution for the good of the country. And the more we make the court a political body, just like Congress, that is to the detriment of the country. Now, we've been worse. We had a civil war, so I know that things have been worse than they are today. But that is not an excuse to say that we are okay with where things are. Things are worse today than they've been in my lifetime. And we need people to step up and say, we're going to be part of making it better, not living with how it is right now and being comfortable with it, because it's not comfortable. It's not good for the country.
Okay, Senator, any last words on this topic? I can give you about 15 seconds before we move on to something else.
I can't say anything in less than 15 seconds, Glenn. You know how this works.
Well, you just wasted half of it.
No, I appreciate where we're going. I think watching the court is very important, and I'm grateful, honestly, every time one of these nominations come up, for people to pay attention to the court, because it really is important.
All right, Ben, you've been making some waves in the Democratic Party. We talked about this last time you were on the show back in December, this coalition for independent Evan McMullin in a potential matchup with Senator Lee in the general election. What's the latest? You know,
Evan McMullin, I've known him to be a person of integrity who will put partisan interests aside and do what he thinks is right is for the state of Utah and for the country. So when Evan called for a coalition of Democrats, independents, and Republicans to stand behind him to go back there and fix Washington, I told you, I know how broken it is. We have to elect people who are going to do what's right for the country above political parties. And I've seen Utah Democrats have lost the U.S. Senate race for 52 years. So it's time for us to, I think, try something new.
So I have to ask you one thing on that very point. What is the relevance of the Utah Democratic Party at this point when you and Mayor Jenny Wilson and some of the most electable Democrats in recent history are taking this route?
Yeah, Utah Democrats have not been relevant in the U.S. Senate race, in statewide race in my lifetime. Well, I guess we had Governor Matheson in the 80s, but we have lost the U.S. Senate race for 52 years. No one nationally or locally looks to Democrats and cares who the Democrats are running for that office, because we have never even been competitive. We lose that race by 30 percentage points. So for the sake of the Utah Democratic Party, I also think for the sake of the country, it's time to try something new. And we can't be... It is time to, I think, look to an independent to maybe fix what's broken in Washington. And I've called on Utah Democrats to join that coalition, to stand up and put our efforts and our support alongside Republicans and independents to stand behind Evan McMullin for his race for the U.S. Senate.
Senator McKay, as a Republican, taking a look at this, what are your thoughts?
Mike Lee gets 68.5% in November, and I'm pretty confident that it will be an opportunity for him to serve a second or a third term, I guess. The interesting part is, as I think about the race and what Ben and his coalition are trying to do, is that in some ways it feels like the Democratic Party in the state of Utah is waving the white flag and putting down the fight and just kind of laying it down. I feel bad, honestly, for the party to be in that kind of position, because it says a lot about where they're at from an ideological standpoint or from where their positions are on issues in the state. But I'd go even one step further, and I'd say, is this the death of the Democratic Party as we know it in the state of Utah? Because you see Ben and many heralding Mitt Romney, and I think he's trying to, or Senator Romney, and trying to kind of get into that vein of people with Evan McMullin, with their nominee against Mike Lee, and kind of pit Republicans against each other in some ways. I think it's going to be an interesting question, but the problem is I feel badly for the Democratic Party after this grenade is finished going off.
Ben, address that. Is what the senator is saying true? Is this the end for the Utah Democratic Party?
No, I think this is a beginning. This is, in Utah, especially at a statewide level, we are not going to move forward centrist policies unless we can form coalitions. Mike Lee is an obstructionist. He's a right-wing senator, and he doesn't represent the values of Utah. So in order to have a different voice, it is time to forge a coalition. And that coalition is going to be disaffected Republicans, it's going to be independents, and it's going to be Democrats. And if we can forge that coalition, which we are in the process of doing right now, we will have a voice. We have been irrelevant for 52 years in the U.S. Senate race, and now is a chance for us to stand up and to be relevant and to make our voice heard. So I think this is a resurgence of centrism, of moderate, pragmatic leadership that's going to work to fix what's broken in Washington and actually give a voice to Utah in the U.S. Senate.
All right, on that note,
if at first or 52 times you don't succeed, Ben, try again.
We are going to have to end it on that note, gentlemen. Great conversation. Thanks so much for being here. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.